Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Sukhi Madhavi.
Amrin Gordas.
Welcoming you all for Gita Mastery Course, Chapter 2, Section 2nd. So before we go there, like always, we would invoke auspiciousness, we would invoke the blessings of all our seniors, the acharyas, the spiritual master, and the Supreme Lord Krishna himself by chanting these set of prayers known as Mangalacharan. So we request all of you also to chant along with us. For your purpose, we have displayed these prayers on the slide so that it is easy for you to read and recite along.
Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha.
Shri Chaitanya
Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapad Shri Gurun Vaishnavamsha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitam Shah He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhaevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimade Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine
Mukam karoti
Vachalam Pangum Langayate Girim Yat Kripa Tamaham Vande Shri Guru Dinataranam Paramananda Madhavam Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram.
Hare Krishna. So we begin with our session by revising what we have learned in the last session. So here we are sharing the quiz based on the last session's learning. Request you to mark the correct answer. Hare Krishna. So we have also shared the attendance link. Those of you who have completed, kindly mark your attendance. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So here are the responses. Question number 1, Krishna is called Madhusudan as he killed the demon named Madhu.
Question 2. Bhagavad Gita was spoken to remove the lamentation of an ignorant man. And that is true. That's correct.
Question number 3, on learning that Arjun will not fight, Dhritarashtra was actually 50% of you have marked happy and 30% of you have marked sensed victory. So I would say both are a little interrelated. He was actually happy because he sensed victory. So whoever has marked A or C, both are correct.
Question 4. Lord Krishna is addressed to be as Sri Bhagavan. How many opulences does Bhagavan possess unlimitedly? And the correct answer is option C or 6.
Krishna used strong words for Arjun. So why did he use so? He wanted to arouse Kshatriya spirit in Arjuna. So the correct answer is C.
Question 6. Arjuna's counters Krishna in verse 4 by saying that elders are worshipable and cannot be counter-attacked.
Question number 7. Spiritual compassion for soul leads to self-realization, and the correct answer is true. So great. Good to see your responses. I would also appreciate, I can see 272 of you have currently joined on Zoom. So if you really want to experience the classroom, the real-time classroom, then I request you to turn on your videos also. Because when we have our videos on, then we become a little more attentive and alert and more focused. So you will be less distracted and more focused, which is what we want you to be. So request you to turn on your video. It is so nice to see many of you, Mala Devi, Shiva Bala, Kartikeshan, Sujit, Narayanan, Ravi Bala, Kamaraju, Ipari, Dinakar, Narayanji, Ganesh, Gita, Indulekha, Jai Shri, Harini Ramesh, Mahalakshmi, Banu Sudha, Shobha, Balaji, Hema Nalini, Remya, Tanushri, and many of you have your videos on. So very good, because if we have our videos on, then we are more focused. So that is the only reason we are requesting you to turn on your video. Hope you have marked your attendance. If you have not marked, the link will be shared again. We share link thrice. one at the beginning just after the quiz, one when we are 30 minutes into the session, and one towards the end of the session. So we want you to mark your attendance because we are actually tracking so that we can remind you in case you are missing out. So attendance has to be marked only once. So if you suppose missed in the beginning, then you can wait and we will be sharing again and you can mark it later. Okay, so here we begin. We have covered in the first section, we have covered till verse number 9. So we will continue from verse number 10 in today's session. Tam uvacha rishikesha prahassan eva bharata senayorubhayor madhye vishidantam idam vachaha. O descendant of Bharat, at that time Krishna, smiling in the midst of both the armies, spoke the following words to the grief-stricken Arjun. So a quick recap. So we have seen that how in chapter number 1, Arjun towards the end, he becomes very, very perplexed. He is not very sure if he wants to fight. His Gandiva bow starts slipping off his hands. And all that has happened because he asked Krishna to take the chariot so that he could see who all have come to fight. And Krishna took the chariot right in the center in front of the chariot of Bhishma and Dronacharya. Both of them worshipable personalities for Arjuna. So seeing them, Arjun starts expressing different types of emotions. And we also see that he gave 4 reasons there of not fighting. So he says that he is feeling very compassionate and a devotee, which is very natural for a devotee to feel compassionate. He was fearful of the destruction of dynasty. So when the dynasty is destroyed and it has its own repercussions in the entire upcoming progeny. So he was concerned about that. He was also talking as how he would enjoy if all his relatives get killed, or if he gets killed, then how he would enjoy. And finally, he also says that he is fearful of sinful reaction, that he would incur so many sins by killing all his relatives and family members. And then in this chapter, we saw how finally coming towards verse number 7, he completely surrenders. He says that Krishna, now I want to be your student and I request you to guide me what is good for me, because there he expresses his indecision. He is not able to take a decision what is right and what is wrong. So now is the real beginning after Arjuna surrendered. Krishna has taken up the role of a teacher, and as we can see here, Krishna is smiling. So he is smiling now. He is not mocking at Arjun, but he is smiling because he is accepting. So the change of relationship, Krishna accepts that, and he is also acknowledging that so far we were friends. So far, whatever was happening between the two of us was very casual conversation, very friendly conversation and jovial conversation. But now there has to be some amount of gravity. Now there has to be some amount of seriousness, because Lord has immediately accepted the position of a superior. Lord is superior and master of everyone, and he has agreed here to accept that position. So though we see that devotees have different type of relationship with the Supreme Lord, like with Krishna. So he is lover of someone and he is son of someone and he's friend of someone. But here he has accepted the position of a guru or a teacher. So now we will see how Krishna is going to teach Arjun, his disciple, who is very powerful, but he's completely bewildered. And here is the first life lesson. Krishna is teaching not only to Arjun, but to the whole world. The knowledge of Gita is eternal and infallible.
So it is like a manual that comes with a product. So if we buy a printer, for example, a Canon printer or an Epson printer, and the company which is manufacturing will give a user manual how to use it. And so the manual, of course, has to be of the original manufacturer. So similarly, who could be a better person to tell us everything about this universe and beyond than a person who actually created it? So Krishna, the Supreme Lord, he is the creator of this universe and the multiple other universes and the spiritual world. So he is actually the manufacturer. So who can be a better person to give us the manual? So here, Bhagavad Gita, that's why is very, very special. This is the book which comes straight from the manufacturer, the original manufacturer. And of course, here is this one word which is used here in the last line of the life lesson is infallible, because God is perfect and therefore whatever his words, whatever he speaks is also perfect. There are no faults. It was the teachings of Bhagavad Gita were true 5,000 years back. They are equally true now and they'll continue to be true in all times to come. And one more amazing thing is, because if, for example, I buy a absent printer and somebody else from a different religion buys an absent printer, say a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew or an atheist, would the manual change depending on his faith? It wouldn't change. Similarly, Bhagavad Gita is equally applicable for each one of us, irrespective of what is our belief system or what is our faith. For example, 2 plus 2 is, would the answer change depending on one's religion? No. So similarly, Bhagavad Gita is actually not just, because many people consider that Bhagavad Gita is a book of Hindus, fully book of Hindus, right? Or it is for Sanatan, people who have faith in Sanatan Dharma. But that's not the case, right? So that's how Bhagavad Gita, the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita is eternal, infallible, and it is equally applicable on all, each and every living entity. Of course, cats and dogs cannot understand, but those who are in human form, human species, yes, they can.
So with this, we completed the first section and getting into the second section. Now this second section, which talks about my real identity, it is a very important, significant and fundamental section. So just like when we are constructing the building, lot of time and effort and resources, money, etc. planning goes in building the foundation. If the foundation is laid well, then one floor after other, and then the next floor and the next floor, and we can actually have a high-rise building which would stand for many, many decades. But if the foundation is weak, then everything can come down crumbling at any time. So similarly, my dear devotees, these next 20 verses are actually the foundational verses of Bhagavad Gita. It is very important to identify what is my real identity. And these verses, mind you, Krishna is not going to repeat anywhere in Bhagavad Gita. Like there are certain verses which Krishna repeats also, or the message he repeats. But these 20 verses, he's speaking once and for all. He's setting the foundation. He's laying the ground rules. And there we go. So please be very, very attentive when we are discussing these 20 verses.
Like, for example, there are certain things that we may repeatedly study in classes. Even if we graduate from lower class to higher class, there may be certain topics which we may go a little deeper. So certain topics are repeated, but once we learn A, B, C, D, that is not repeated in the future classes. So once we have learned, based on that, all our further education happens. Similarly, as Gita was explaining, Krishna is laying the foundation of spiritual life. So if we understand this, everything would be great. And so this is all about my real identity. Who am I?
Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Ashochayan Anvashochastvam Pragyavadamscha Bhashase Gatasuna Gatasumscha Nanushocanti Panditaha.
Sri Bhagavan Vacha. So we see that when Krishna speaks, it is not mentioned Krishna Vacha, Sri Krishna Vacha, it is mentioned Sri Bhagavan Vacha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, while speaking learned words, you are mourning for what is not worthy of grief. Those who are wise lament neither for the living nor for the dead. So Krishna, like an expert doctor, so if I have a disease and I don't know what to do and I'm really suffering, then I go to a good doctor. What does a good doctor do? How does a doctor become a good doctor? Based on his accurate diagnosis of the problem. Of course, Krishna, the Supreme Lord, he can diagnose everything perfectly. So immediately Krishna identifies the core problem which Arjuna is facing. What is that? Krishna is saying that although you are speaking big words, you are speaking learned words, but you are mourning, you are lamenting, you're feeling sad for that which is not worthy of grief. The wise people, they neither lament for the living nor for the dead. So, in one way, we see that Krishna has also is chastising Arjuna, because sometimes when somebody is saying big words, but he's making some fundamental error. Similarly, Arjun is quoting Artha Shastra, Dharma Shastra, and he's giving so much logic, and even we become so enamored. Wow, I agree with Arjun. What solid points he's giving, that he should not fight this war. And then immediately all those points are, Krishna identifies a fundamental flaw in all that logic. So Krishna is chastising him that truly wise do not mistake the body for the self. They do not say that I am this body, and based on this that's why you're facing so much of grief and so much of problem.
So actually with this verse, it confirms that Krishna has accepted the position of a teacher. Because like a teacher, it is a responsibility of the teacher to correct the student also. So it is not that always you keep pampering and appreciating the student, but wherever chastisement is required, then the teacher chastises the student. So here also Krishna is telling that though you are speaking like you are a very learned person, but you are not talking what is right. So you are not speaking what is proper and what is improper. You do not know the difference. So in the essence, Krishna is telling Arjun that you are not a wise person, which means you are a fool. So basically, Krishna is telling that what you are talking, it is very foolish. It does not make sense. Why? Because you do not know. So you do not know the difference between the body and the soul. And that is why you are a fool. You are just seeing these personalities as your relatives, but you are not seeing the soul behind them. So you are just believing that Bhishma is just this body, and if he dies, which means if the body is dead, then everything is closed. Or if Dronacharya dies, everything is over. So you are not understanding that they are all soul and including you. So Krishna is chastising Arjuna. Krishna is removing his misconceptions because he's talking about the presence of the soul, and then he's saying the difference between wise and fool.
So unless one has spiritual perspective, everything remains temporary and self-centered. So we see here that because Arjun's whole consideration was me, I am there, I will not enjoy, I may accrue sinful reactions for what I am going to do, and on both the sides, they are only Kurus, my family members. So at the end of the day, this war will actually destroy my dynasty, my family. And then the future of my dynasty is, definitely they will all go to hell. So this is how things. So if we see, Arjun is not really considering, in true sense, he is not really considering dharma. He's just being very, very self-centered. And that's why actually if you see nowadays, there is so many moral dilemmas which come. For example, drinking alcohol is good or bad? Well, in India, still many people may still consider it not to be okay. But then at many other places, in many other cultures, and even in India now, social drinking is acceptable. So is drinking alcohol okay or not? Right? Some people will say yes, some people will say no. Everybody will give different kinds of logic. Or for example, eating meat. Is that okay or is that not okay? Or something which is very touchy, abortion. Right? So there are so many situations or things which we may not really be able to come to a conclusively whether it is moral or immoral. So we cannot actually resolve these moral dilemmas on our own. I have some logic, somebody else has some other logic, right? So all of this we cannot actually resolve. It has to be resolved from a higher spiritual perspective, right? Like we saw some time back, Bhagavad Gita is a manual, right, from the original manufacturer. So actually the original manufacturer will tell what is the right way of using this device and what is the wrong way of using this device. If you don't use it the way the manufacturer intends it to be used, then the device will get spoiled, we will be unhappy, and the whole thing will be a big mess.
Wise and fool is distinguished on the basis of spiritual knowledge, not academic degrees. So this is what Krishna is establishing here. That a person is wise just not because he has the big degrees, but more importantly, how much spiritual knowledge do I have? How, to what extent do I believe that I am a soul? So that, and not only believing, how much time of my life do I live thinking that I am the soul? So on that basis, it is described that whether a person is a wise or a foolish person.
And that is where we can actually recognize that our education system is lopsided. Right? Our whole education system, there is no education about spirit. Right?
Natva evaham jatu nasham natvam neme janadipaha na chaiva na bhavishyama sarve vayam atah param. Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. So now Krishna is talking about how these kings, so because Arjun was worried, that was his biggest anxiety, and that is how he was changing the decision of fighting or not fighting, that all these people who have gathered here would stop existing, would die. So Krishna is telling that never was there a time when I, which means the Supreme Lord, did not exist, nor at any time these kings did not exist. So they were all there in the past, they are all there in the present, and they will all be there in the future. So you do not worry about them being lost. They will always be there. So now with this verse, Krishna is establishing some very important aspects. One, he is telling that individuality is never lost. So he is telling that all these kings were individual living entities in the past. And in the future also, they will maintain to be individual living entity. And then why is it? Because they are all eternal soul. They have acquired this body, but this body is not them. The body can keep changing, but the soul does not change, and the soul is eternal. So these 2 points he's telling, one is individuality is never lost, and second, he's talking about how each one of them is actually eternal spirit soul. So with this, Krishna is also removing 2 misconceptions. One is concept of oneness. So I have come across many such people, and I'm sure all of you would have also met such people who believe that perfection means merging in Supreme Lord. Perfection means becoming one with the Supreme Lord. But Krishna is saying it does not happen. Krishna is saying never there was a time when they were not there or when they will not be there also. So they will always be there. So they will all have separate individual identity. So the concept of oneness is challenged here by Krishna. And second, that Krishna has a form. So Krishna has a form in which he is present. He is not formless, that things can keep merging in him and he does not have any shape or form. So these are the 2 misconceptions which Krishna is talking about here.
And also, one very popular thing in among Hindus is, you'll hear many people talk like this. Hey, whatever it is, Shiva, Muruga, Ganesh, Rama, Narsimha, Krishna, all are same. All are same, right? So, but here Krishna is very clearly identifying the different individualities. So there are different personalities, and each one of them we see that they have very different, unique qualities, and they have very unique pastimes, and so all that is very different. So that is where what we need to understand. So that misconception has to be removed from our knowledge base.
So now, before we understand in detail about Bhagavad Gita, as I said that these are very foundational verses, so we want to take you to another level for understanding, so that it internalizes that how we are the soul, how we are not the body who has a soul, but we are the soul who has a body. So to establish that, we are taking a little break from Bhagavad Gita here, and we are giving you some scientific evidences. So scientifically, how can we establish, because we all believe so much in science, we never question science. We question Bhagavad Gita, but we never question science. We question Krishna and Rama, but we never question whatever we learn in science. So that is why we are taking a little break from Bhagavad Gita, and scientifically we are going to establish the science of soul.
In fact, I would say that we are not taking a break. We are seeing that what science is only beginning to understand is already stated by Krishna 5,000 years back. So, some of you may have this question: is there life after death? Is it a fact or is it fiction? Does life exist when we die after that? So, so there are some of these questions which we'll see that how they are addressed in Bhagavad Gita. It is very clear, but how the modern science is tackling that question. So the word science of soul is it's actually a very difficult thing to understand. Soul is very difficult to understand. Why? Because as Krishna will speak the further verses of Bhagavad Gita, soul is something which is beyond the senses. We cannot touch, we cannot see, we cannot hear. So it is beyond the senses, it is beyond the mind, it is beyond the intelligence, which means that on our own, we cannot understand, see, perceive the soul. On our own, it's not possible. But when Krishna gives the knowledge, then we can understand. So let's see how modern science is only beginning to discover this truth. And we will see this through two things. One is near-death experiences and past life memories. So near-death experiences are extraordinary perceptions of people who are clinically dead, but they are later revived. Somebody who's clinically dead, which means no heartbeat, the brain is not functioning, so they are clinically dead. But then they have experiences, and some of them who are revived later, they narrate their experiences. So that's one thing that we look at. And second is spontaneous past life memories. So there are children who are born with birthmarks which correspond to their memories of whom they were in the previous life. Right, so we look at some of the examples in this case. So first we look at the near-death experiences and out-of-body experience. So there are actually not just hundreds, there are thousands of cases, and scientists and researchers all over the world have done a lot of research, and it is still continuing. So as I was explaining, near-death experience means the person is physically completely unconscious state. He's very, very close to death. Example like cardiac arrest. We are all who are watching, all of us, our heart is beating and pumping blood. Cardiac arrest means the heart stops pumping blood, right? So if the heart doesn't pump blood, the brain cells very quickly degrade, and we move into death, so-called death. So due to cardiac arrest patients, the person is clinically dead, or any other life-threatening situation also. In that situation, if somebody has a experience which we cannot explain logically, there are some of the near-death experiences. So before we carry on, there is this research. Now, sometimes people say, why don't you quote some Indian research? Well, I don't have an access to Indian research. I don't know whether Indians are doing research in this area or not, but West is. So this is from Medical Journal, Current Problems in Pediatrics. 11 to 14% of average American population who are mentally and physically healthy have had out-of-body experience. So it is not something which is very rare, which means the physical body is lying somewhere, but the person is able to perceive, see, or feel or experience things which is not possible where the body is currently lying. So, and there is this person, Dr. Michael Sabom. He's a cardiologist, professor at Emory Medical School. He has written this book, and I'm sure post this book also there will be other research papers, and many other researchers have published books on this. So what he has to say, he says there is enough research in near-death experiences with impeccable scientific credentials. So which means near-death experience is not, it is a scientific fact. So let's look at some cases. I think that is what is how we can understand the near-death experience. So this lady, Kimberly Clark, she was a clinical assistant professor. She worked with School of Social Work, University of Washington. So what happened? She came across a patient, and that patient name was Maria. So this was way back in 1984. Maria was a worker. She was a migrant in US, and she was brought into the hospital because of cardiac arrest. So she was brought in, and it was dark and it was very late. And of course, cardiac arrest patient means, person was lying on the stretcher, unconscious. And then later, this Maria was revived, but she continued to stay in the hospital for many, many days. And Kimberly met Maria, and Maria had some very fantastic thing to tell. She said, when I was brought into the hospital, I could see the nurses, I could see the doctors, and then I moved out of the hospital. The body was in the ER, emergency room, but she moved out of the hospital, and in fact, she was kind of floating. And on one of the windows ledges, the sunshades, she saw a tennis shoe, and she described that tennis shoe. So when Kimberly heard all these details, she was very intrigued. How is it possible? This lady was comatose. She was a cardiac arrest patient. It is not possible for her to have experienced this. Anyway, she wanted to cross check whether it is just some hallucination or is it true. So Kimberly, she stepped out of the hospital. She tried to look at all the windows and ledges. She was not visible. But she still didn't want to rule this out. She went up floor by floor. Every floor she went, and every window she had to press her nose against the glass and see what is on the lower window ledge. So first floor she didn't see anything. She moved up the second floor, third floor, and finally one of the windows she saw, yes, there appears to be a tennis shoe, right? And later when the tennis shoe was retrieved, Kimberly noticed that it is not possible for one to see the details which Maria had explained, the shoes like this, the nature of the shoe, the design of the shoe. Kimberly said that it is not possible to have noticed all those details from where she was seeing the shoe from the window. It is not possible, which means somebody was there floating at the third floor height, at least 30 feet height from the ground. Somebody was floating and watching that tennis shoe. So how is it possible? The physical body was there in the hospital, but the person had a proven physical experience, right? So this is one of the cases. And here we see a very, very famous doctor. His name is Pim van Lommel. And this is the cover of a magazine where it says, one of the world's most intriguing scientists proves the existence of a soul. So what this scientist has done is he has studied 344 cardiac arrest patients. Now, cardiac arrest patients are excellent for research purpose because the person is practically dead, right? So out of 344 cases, 64 had NDE. So there is this particular case which he explains that this person was brought into the hospital. Person was already in coma, means deep unconsciousness. He was brought into the hospital at that time. The nurses and the whole team got together to resuscitate him. But before doing that, this person was having a denture. So that denture was removed and they started the resuscitation process. So this resuscitation, trying to revive him, took full 90 minutes, 1.5 hours before he could get sufficient heartbeat. The blood pressure became normal. It took 90 minutes. And even after the resuscitation, even after his blood pressure became normal, and he was still in coma, right? So somehow the person survived, but he had no consciousness, no external consciousness. And 1 week he was in ICU, and then he came out of coma. So this person was lying down on the bed, and one of the resuscitation team, nurse came. This man asked, "Where is my denture?" And this nurse was like, denture. So she was so amazed that he remembers that denture was taken out, although this person was in coma, deep unconsciousness. How is it possible? And then this man went on to explain, "See, I think you have lost my denture. You took out my denture, you kept it on a cart, which had many other bottles, and it had a drawer also underneath." And then this man gave accurate description of the room. He said it was a small room. He gave the description of the dress which the resuscitation team was wearing. And one thing which he explained later, he said, actually, I was very terrified because at some point, the whole team was going to give up on me. I was very terrified that if you will give up, which means I'm really going to die. So then later, this nurse confirmed that during the resuscitation process, because it was taking so much of time, 1.5 hours in between, the team actually had lost hope because they knew that the prognosis was very pessimistic, the condition was very poor of the patient. There were very slim chances of survival, but still the team went on and finally this man survived. So here we saw two cases of past life memories, of near-death experiences.
So you must be wondering that why we are discussing so much about near-death experience and what it has to do with Bhagavad Gita. So we are talking about these because in both these cases, what we discussed, the patient that way was unconscious. He was actually not aware by our standards. What we say is conscious and unconscious. So from our standards, he was unconscious. Not only unconscious, one of them was in coma. And second one, the heart was not functioning. So it was such a difficult situation that ordinarily nobody can really connect to the outer world, what is happening around there. And we saw that how they accurately remembered and recalled later on as what was happening and which was verified as true also. So now we are discussing about the presence of the soul. And that is the only explanation to explain this entire thing, what was happening. So at a soul level, they were conscious. At the body level, they were unconscious. That is why we have picked up such cases to establish that how we are all actually soul. And body is just an instrument which we are possessing.
Yes, so the physical body, the location where the physical body was located, from there the person could not have seen all of this. So we'll take just this one more case of near-death experience. This is one of the most remarkable cases. Those of you who are very interested, you should search, do a Google search for a BBC documentary called The Day I Died. The Day I Died. It's a BBC documentary. If you have pen and paper, you can note it down. The BBC has shown it once. After that, they have stopped showing this. It is not available in a DVD form. Just some of the websites or the video streaming services, they have it on their channel. So if you can locate, you can watch it. I've seen it a couple of times. So there was this, in that documentary, there's this case of Pam Reynolds, which is covered with one of the most remarkable cases. She had, if you can see this image, this is at the brain stem, her artery, there was a giant aneurysm. Aneurysm means that the artery wall becomes relaxed or become weak and the blood balloons in it. And if this balloon ruptures, then there is a massive hemorrhage and the person would die. So when she discovered that she had this, so she went and met this particular doctor, Dr. Robert Spetzler, neurosurgeon at Barrow Neurological Institute in Phoenix, Arizona in US, a very famous neurological surgeon. And he had pioneered a very risky operation technique. And that operation technique was called Operation Standstill. So what actually they will do in this operation is they will cool the body. Like our temperature is what, 37 degrees, right? Body temperature
98.4.
98.6 Fahrenheit. But that's in Fahrenheit. I wanted to talk about centigrade. So here the body is actually cooled to 16 degrees and the person is kept on a heart and lung machine. So which means the heart stops, the brain stops, the breathing stops. So heart is not functioning, the brain is not functioning, all the EEG, the EEG waves, the brain waves are all flat. The heart is not functioning, the breathing is not functioning. So that we can understand that clinically this person is actually dead. And what they do is they put a clicking devices in the ear, which is at 90 decibels. Now a human can hear anything upward of 20 decibels. So 90 decibel clicking devices are put in the ear, which click 11 times every second, which means you and I consciously sitting here, if we put these clicking devices, we cannot hear any conversation. You cannot hear this class. So these clicking devices were put in here, and that is how the patient was made ready for the operation. So this patient, Pam Reynolds, was clinically dead, and she had a very vivid near-death experience. So why this case is so important? Because she was under medical supervision. She remembers seeing the cranial saw, the instrument with which her brain was cut open. So this if you watch the documentary, the neurologist says, actually, we do not remove the instruments just before we are about to operate, so that all the hygiene is maintained. Then this Pam Reynolds, she heard a female voice. So one of the assistants who was there, they were trying to connect one of the machines into her left leg. So she said that the artery is very, very small. The blood vessel is too small on the right side. So the doctor said, you try the other side, right? So she heard that conversation. Now with the clicking devices, her brain waves are flat, heart is not functioning. All that is in that situation, she is able to see, she's able to hear. And surprisingly, when she recovered, she heard this conversation, but she never recalled hearing the clicking device, which was plugged into her. She never recalled hearing that. Right. So, and after that, it goes on what all she saw. It's quite an elaborate ND which she had. So later, when Dr. Robert Spelster was interviewed, he said he made that point that at that stage in the operation, nobody can observe, nobody can hear, and he says that it is completely inconceivable. And he said that currently I have no explanation that how such an sensory experience could have had in that situation. So that was the remarkable case of Pam Reynolds. I am reminding you, there is this documentary by BBC called The Day I Died. There are many, many cases. It's a very beautifully, wonderfully done documentary. They build cases not only with people who support ND, but also with critics who criticize the ND understanding. This is a good one. You can watch. And now we will, the last few minutes, we will look at the past life memories. Past life memories, as we saw, is about a young child remembering the previous life, right? So this was spearheaded by, we see here this picture of Dr. Ian Stevenson. He's no more now. So Dr. Ian Stevenson is a Carl Searle Professor of Psychiatry at University of Virginia. 2,000 cases, more than 2,000 cases he has done research, reincarnation memories. So that was really, really amazing. And there are a couple of things which, see, reincarnation, sometimes people think, it's a hearsay. A child or a parent, just to gain some fame, they may create a story, he remembers previous life. So Dr. Stevenson, what he did was, they go and study the birthmarks or the birth defects, and then they correlate that birthmark or that birth defect with what the child is describing to be in the previous life, right? So we look at some of the examples, cases of this.
And before we go into the cases, so why we are discussing this is, now what is past life memory? So if a person dies in any religion, any tradition, whatever is left behind after death, which means this mortal body, so it is either buried or it is burnt. So technically speaking, whatever we are seeing, this package, whatever we can perceive through our senses, it is ensured that it is destroyed, right? So if I am this body and I am destroyed at the time of death, I am either burned or I am buried. After 3 years, 4 years, 6 years, somebody takes birth somewhere else and starts recalling what has happened to me now. So what is it that is connecting? What is the connection between me who died and a small child who recollects everything what I had undergone through? He can recollect who were my relatives, where did I stay, and how did I die, and what emotional changes I had to go through, how would I feel, all those things so accurately. So now these past life cases where we were discussing about Ian Stevenson's 2000 cases. So now it is not that he was into all the rumors and gossips and he compiled these 2000 cases. These 2000 cases are medically verified cases. So that a team of doctor actually goes and checks out the details and makes sure that whatever is happening, it is not something which is cooked up for some fake publicity. So all these are medically verified cases, and those are around 2000, and it is not only in India. So generally we have this tendency, हाँ इंडिया में अरे हमारे गांव में भी ऐसा होता था. We talk about village and then yeah I remember or somebody told me. So it is not the folk tales we are talking about. We are talking about medically proven cases where people remember their past lives, even the fact that the body was destroyed. So the only connection between that body which is dead and the body which is now is that unseen element called soul. Otherwise, there is no connectivity.
Of course, Bhagavad Gita solves the riddle. So whether it is Ian Stevenson or it is Michael Sebom or all these researchers and doctors, they have some speculative theory, or a hypothesis. But actually, if you read Bhagavad Gita, just in the second chapter, all these mysteries immediately resolved in a very, very natural way. Okay, so coming back to this, in fact, University of Virginia still has a department. The Dr. Stevenson is not here, but that department he found is still functioning. And maybe 1 or 2 years back, I was watching one of their conferences where, the current professors, they were sharing cases of past life memories. So that is also available on YouTube. If you're interested, you can search it and have a look. Actually, the Day I Died documentary, I wanted to show you. But because we are streaming live on YouTube, they will block our video.
Probably we can share the
there are copyright issues.
We can share the link in the description video and they can check.
Yeah. So there are copyright issues and there are other issues. They block our video, so I'm not able to share that with you. Okay, so Dr. Ian Stevenson, he did a lot of research in India, and this is Dr. Satwan Pastrija. Till few years back, I don't know currently whether she's still working in NIMHANS, Bangalore. So she is a very senior member of the Department of Clinical Psychology there. So she was one of the research associates with Dr. Ian Stevenson. And now we will look at this particular video.
With hundreds of birthmarks and birth defects in children who claim previous lives.
In particular.
Okay.
Interested in a collection. We have about 15 cases where there are 2 birthmarks corresponding to bullet wounds of entry and exit. And forensic pathologists know that nearly always if you shoot somebody, the bullet wound of entry is small and round, and the bullet wound of exit is large and irregular in shape. And that's the way our birthmarks, and about half of these cases, they correspond exactly that way.
So just to a quick recap what he said, if his accent is not very clear, the audio is a little muffled for this video. So what he was explaining is that among so many cases that he studied, there are 15 cases of double birthmarks. So he was talking about the forensic investigators or the scientists who study crime scenes and others. So they all know that when there is a bullet, when a person gets shot, so when the bullet enters the body, it makes a small round hole, but when the bullet exits the body, then it makes a bigger irregular hole. And what doctor is explaining here is that they have a child who has past life memory, and he has the memory of a person in the previous life being shot. And this child has the bullet entry, at the bullet entry point he has a birthmark, and at the exit point also he has a birthmark, and which has corresponded with the what is it called, post-mortem reports of that previous person. And here they are discussing a case from Turkey where we can see this boy, he is born. Now this case is not a birthmark, it is case of
Deformity.
of a birth defect, right?
He was born without a right ear but with memories of the life of a man who was shot in the head.
He remembered the previous life of a peasant farmer, this was in Turkey, who went to sleep at the end of the day in a pasture, and a neighbor came along hunting rabbits, and in the twilight mistook this sleeping peasant for a rabbit and shot him with a shotgun at point-blank range. We were able to go to the government hospital where the wounded man had been taken, and there we found a report showing that he died about 10 days later of hemorrhage in the brain. And this boy had memories of this man's life and his death.
So what happened in this case was that this child, he remembers his previous life. So he was in the farm, and somebody else came around and shot him from a point blank range, and he was taken to the hospital, and for 10 days he was in the hospital, and then later he died of hemorrhage. So this child remembered very, very clearly. So what this team, Dr. Ian Stevens and his team, what they did is they went to that hospital, they took out the postmortem reports, and they found that where the bullet had entered and what had happened, and then that's how they could corroborate that the person was shot near the ear, and that trauma carried over to the next body, and this child had no ear. Right. So let's look at, there are, I think, two more cases.
Professor Stevenson has studied hundreds of birthmarks and birth defects in children who claim previous lives.
In particular,
The skull of a Turkish miller killed by a blow to the back of the head with a flour shovel. This picture is from the official post-mortem report. Later, a child claimed to remember the miller's life. The boy had a misshapen skull. Violent death occurs frequently in Stevenson's best cases. He speculates that the trauma of
So
such
here
a
we
death
see the case of a Turkish miller. He was hit on his head by other person with his shovel. So the post-mortem report, the previous picture was of his post-mortem picture where he had injuries to his head. And this child who remembered being the miller in the previous life, he has his skull D-shaped, right? It's exactly at the place where he was hit by the shovel in the previous life.
may cause it to be remembered.
And this is
Burmese
the
man
one more
recalled a
case with which
previous
we'll
life as a
end today's
notorious
session.
bandit who was captured and executed for murder.
the hanging was bungled so that he had to be hanged twice. And the subject, who had the memories of this brigand, was born with a almost absent lower jaw. His mandible was exceedingly small, and his mouth was very narrow and tight, so that he really can only take liquid food, and he can't open his mouth. But birth defects of the kinds that we have in these cases are uncommon, and they're not the sort that you find in the textbooks of birth defects, the monographs, with rare exceptions. A few of them are, but most of them are not.
So here was the case of a Burmese man. He remembers being a bandit or a thug in the previous life, and he was caught and he was sentenced to death by hanging. So his hanging could not happen properly. He was hanged once, but he did not die, so he had to be hanged the second time. And because of that trauma, he was born. We could see the picture both from the front and from the side that he almost had no jaw. And doctor was explaining that how his mouth was so constricted that whole of his life he could not eat solid food. He had to be only on liquids. So, and he also made one point that these birth defects are very, very abnormal. These are not the regular birth defects which are there in the medical textbook. So it is actually unexplained for. So with that few cases, we have come to the end of today's session.
So hope you are finding it equally intriguing as how we are finding it quite intriguing that how these things happen. So Krishna, now in next session, we would read relevant verses from Bhagavad Gita corresponding to what we have seen today. And we will try to understand that how is it that somebody can remember the past life? And how can one person remember the past life but not me? So what is the difference that I don't remember and other remember, and how is it actually possible? How does the soul remember? How the soul carries the impression from one body to another? So all those we would be discussing in the next class. So looking forward to see all of you. And yes, in between there are a couple of announcements. So tomorrow we would be going live from ISKCON Chennai to celebrate Balram Purnima. So tomorrow is the appearance day of Lord Balaram. In fact, today we had a session also in the glorification of Lord Balaram. So those of you who have not seen it, it is there on our YouTube channel. And at your convenient time, you can know more about Lord Balaram by watching that session. And tomorrow we will telecast the Abhishek from ISKCON Chennai Temple live. So we invite you all to join in the participation. Also, the next week, which is on next Monday, we have Janmashtami celebrations. So we would be sharing the details of when we would be going live from the temple again at midnight. That first Arati, Abhishek, Arati, Bhoga, all would be telecasted live.
And before we close this session, these are the memory verses. So we expect you to read till verse number
20.
20. Yes. And these are the memory verses, the 7th, the 13th, and the 14th verse of this chapter. So thank you very much.
Hare Krishna, Hare
Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. We'll be very happy if you'd like to share your experience or whatever your thoughts on what we discussed today. You can write to us at amar@studygita.com or sukirti@studygita.com. Shila Prabhupada ki